Today on Stable Showcase, we have Kevin from Arbitrage Racing. Kevin, how's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the time. So, I think one of the biggest things that people have been asking me to ask you once they heard that you might be one of the guests is how do you go through the process of eliminating top tier horses from the stable, like an LBJ goat, to obviously make room for other horses, but like, how do you decide who makes the cut and who doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. You ideally identify it before you buy. I mean, that's the dream where you can kind of make that cut before they make it into your stable and avoid having to cut them in the first place. But I mean, it's inevitable. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not buying early enough. So it happens plenty. But yeah, the key is being able to cut ties early, I would say, where you don't necessarily know it's a like you don't want to eliminate all upside for the new buyer.
Mm,
So I try to make a move and evaluate quickly, um, give it kind of the car wash, as I call it, testing all distances to where I feel pretty confident where it can run, what level it can run at. And you do that just kind of, at least for me, I start low dollar, figure out where the flames are going. That helps me identify what type of horse it is.
mm.
And then from there, you can basically ramp up the competition a little bit. And ideally, the flames just keep coming. The placements are where you want them to be, which for me is as a specialist skewed directly to the left, meaning your podium a ton, or if it's kind of a mid, you want to see that natural U. So ramp up the competition, and then yeah, trust the flames as much as you can, and then pay attention to who's flaming in the race with you, who's not flaming, and if you get beat out, pay attention to who the three are that flamed above you, and that helps me kind of assess where on the totem pole they are. And I mean, for me, I try to keep it fairly lean. Um, and if it's not kind of the top of the food chain in one of the classes, I'll cut it loose because somebody else can grind it a lot better than me in those $2 or $5 ones. So once again, I don't want to only sell horses that can't win. You want to sell some that are good and you just don't have time for it. And that's kind of what I've been doing recently.
I figured. I think LBJ Goat and Milk Bar can still win plenty. I think you left a little bit of meat on the bones for those ones. So
Yep. There's been a few. I mean, we had that one. Good, Bad, Ugly was another big one we sold pretty early. Hambone won quite a
yeah,
bit. Um, and then, yeah, so we try to do that. We sold brioche and chocolate earlier this week. So there's been a few.
yeah. Now, is there any like toolboxes or kind of ways of thinking that you kind of applied from what you do professionally into Zed Run? Like we kind of know that you know your background from the other shows, but is there any like specific layouts of thinking that you use to kind of go through the process of constructing a stable? Or if you're coaching somebody new coming into the game, like this is where you start, and this is
Mhm.
kind of the next progression going forward.
Yeah, I mean, one parallel I'd say is like with day trading. I'm not a professional day trader, but I dabble in it. And one thing I learned there was there's just no way to know everything right from the start. And part
Mm-hmm.
of the best way to learn is through a little bit of pain and get those lessons the hard way. But at the same time, you don't want to go all in, fall flat on your face, and just get so discouraged you never come back. So I think one piece of advice for someone starting out in Zed is don't get so excited and kind of blow everything right up front. Ask questions, talk to the right people. I'm always willing to help people if they reach out on Twitter or in Discord. But I'm not the only resource. There's a ton of great resources, a ton of great videos on YouTube. And once you feel confident and you feel like you have a decent grasp on the game, what resources you can use to analyze, like the Know Your Horses tool, Haku, Stack Nax. There's some great free tools that you can use. So know the toolbox, and then buy your first horse. Do a little research on the market, figure out one that can grind some low dollar, even freeze. That'll help you a ton in a very low risk setting, just doing freeze or $2, and learn your lessons that way rather than trying to buy a half Ethereum horse and realizing you kind of bought a dud at a lot of distances. So that'd be my advice: is kind of ease into it, use the resources, and yeah, and then ramp up from there.
Yeah. So you mentioned the tournaments. From your experience so far, do you think there's a difference between a good tournament horse and a good day-to-day grinding horse? And if
Oh, yeah,
so, how
big
do you
time.
kind of protect the one asset versus the other so that way you're not destroying your grinder trying to qualify for a tournament and then you can't figure out how to make it profitable again?
Exactly. Yeah, it's super tough, and Zed kind of trapped some people with the setup in the first few tournaments where you see the shiny new object with tournaments. But I mean, in reality, what there's the first tournament was there was only like 570 that made it. They eventually made it over 1,000 with the A and B tournament, but in reality, only a third of the horses, or not even that, like a quarter of the horses that make the tournament make any money doing it. Right? You have to finish top three in the first round, and then it goes up significantly from there. So 75% of horses that make a tournament aren't going to make money. And you spend all this time grinding and farming free races, ramping up your class points, which I think they did a great job adjusting the system to kind of accommodate some of that. But there's a ton of horses that were trapped in class one because they took freeze. And even when you were tanking freeze, you didn't lose points and you only gained points when you were doing the podium. So a lot of horses got run up. I call it trapped by the Zed freeze. And then for me, we try to have our tournament horses, and which are typically the specialists in this format. Mids are unpredictable in the fact that like they just have that natural U. If you catch
Mm-hmm.
a hot streak with the current scoring, you might sneak in this next tournament with the winners tournament should help that, but it's all about how like what side of the U you catch during that 25 race stretch. So for those, we honestly just ran them like normal. And if they happen to get hot, they made it in the tournament. If not, we had them in a class where we could still grind some Ethereum that way. And then we also have our specialists, which are more designed for this tournament structure because you can run them exactly where they want. They're more predictable, and then they get into the tournament. And at least with ours, we have ones that are top tier enough to where we have a good shot at advancing in whatever bracket they fall in. But at the same time, we have kind of our second tier of horses that we know could have a shot in a tournament, but it's more profitable if they just grind the fields in class three and class two, while the more, I guess, senior horses try for the tournaments. So we don't completely leave paid racing, but our tournament horses want to be put in the best spot to get the best placement in the bracket they can get. So we I'd say probably keep a third of our horses out of tournaments and just try to grind, and then top 2/3 will at least attempt getting in the tournament.
Now, with your tournament, are you guys purposely tanking a little bit to adjust your placement within the bracket so that way you're not racing billions in the first race if possible?
Yeah.
I know
Some
once you're
horses
up
it
at
was
that
like
1,000 points, it's kind of hard to adjust
right.
much, but
Yeah, I think Milk Bar
below
went
that,
from like unraced to 1,000 in like a month, so it was just
yeah, that was
insane.
nuts.
You could tank that horse if you wanted, but it's just not worth it with a Z2 Genesis. Let them win 25% and just go way up. But yeah, one horse that comes to mind for that is Deer Creek for us. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
horse actually we got back in trade with some Ethereum for the LBJ Goat trade with Wagney, and it's a really good class two horse, super consistent distance, just pounds the podium, flames almost every time as long as it's not in class one. So that's a horse that will do extremely well in a B type tournament, but not in the A bracket. They go to A, it may come in third, but it's likely to come third, fourth, and fifth. Whereas if you get it in the B, it's going to come in first, second, third, fourth. So you can kind of move the placement over a little bit with a little easier competition. So what we typically do there is get as high up the rankings as we can, run it like we want the optimal, I guess, points per race. And then as it gets closer to Tuesday and that cut line, so I know we just hit it for this latest tournament, you can get a better idea of what the line's going to be for both A as well as missing the entire tournament. And
Mm-hmm.
that last day, you can kind of farm those tank races, which is a two-prong approach. It'll lower your class points, so it'll get you out of the A bracket if you want to get out of there. And then B, it lowers your class points, so you will face easier competition in theory in that first round quarterfinal where they try to match you against similar class point horses. So
Okay.
that's our approach.
Yeah, I was curious how the bigger stables were thinking about it. Now, with going from, I I think you were running probably like 6 horses pretty consistently in your stable, and then I think it was probably around fatigues when you started adding more. I'm assuming because
Yeah.
you couldn't run them as often as you could. I
Yep.
think you're up to over 36 roughly last time I looked.
Yeah, something like that. We've scaled back a little bit, but yeah, we
Yeah.
have, I'd say 15 to 20 we feel really good about running.
Okay. Now with bringing in horses like Vanilla Bean, who are kind of more of an any distance horse. But then we also know you like specialists quite a bit. What's the thought process of bringing in these more U-shaped horses? Is it just to add diversity? Or are you
Yeah.
seeing something that you weren't before? Or
I mean, I think they got hit really, really hard with that class update about a month ago or whenever it was, 6 weeks ago, with the change to 6 points for a win and then -2 for all the 7 through 12. So that hit mids a lot because you can't naturally tank those. They just form the U, and part of that was offsetting the wins with like an equal opposite force on the 12th. And when you take that away, it just causes them all to gradually increase up into a class that just doesn't, basically where they can't win anymore, and then they stop gaining class points. So the latest update was great to see because it leveled that out a little bit at least, and kind of brought them back to some utility, and they increased the class 2 way up to 140. So we just saw some opportunity there of horses that were probably undervalued a bit, or people had kind of gotten discouraged running them in the new point system. And I'm always about trying to kind of zig while others are zagging. Like, it's a specialist meta right now. Everything is revolved around specialists. Even the grand finals and tournaments are really skewed towards those distance specialists because you have the 2000, the 22, and 26 all there. So you pretty much need the consistent horse to succeed in these tournament structures. But I realize it's a long game. I have a ton of specialists. I'm well covered in that space right now. But eventually the meta is going to shift, you would think, or at least there's going to be other opportunities coming out for these U-shaped horses that win a ton. Like, winning is what matters in horse racing, right? So it makes sense to get the best winners on your team, and having that versatility within your stable can allow for you to just have better coverage. And if one of these tournaments, I don't know, I have no idea, but maybe there's a tournament that comes out that's like just winner take all, and every time you have this really big bracket, everybody's in it, and just one horse advances every time. You want the horse that pulls the 20% win chance, and then you just hope you get lucky 3-4 times in a row, rather than that one who may pull a 50% podium chance, which is great right now. But if it's only winning 10% of the time, it's going to get eaten in that next tournament. So just thinking outside the box a little bit, trying to round out the stable. Plus, I mean, it's Vanilla Bean. I've been seeing that horse ever since I started 8 months ago, kind of a legend of the game. So I love that horse, and I've been wanting to race it for a while.
I was going to ask how it feel adding that one to the stable, because I know that was one of the most famous ones that I saw.
Yeah, I'll be like scrolling, and I'll just see it pop up, and I just get excited about it. And then like when I like enter a race, it still feels weird to see that one highlighted in orange, right, as like your horse. So it's probably just as weird for me, if not weirder than for everybody else.
How does it feel when you see LBJ Goat in a race
the
and it's not under your name?
Sadness. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Tyler, who owned Vanilla Bean from Nigger Horses previously, and a lot of like the sadness he was feeling about selling Vanilla Bean is like, I feel like it's the right decision, but it is sad. Is exactly how I felt with like LBJ, because it's crazy. Like, it's just a freaking digital horse, right? But you spend so much time like entering it and like watching it grow up or whatever that you do get kind of attached. It's sad, but very true.
And it's kind of cool too, because Ebbs talked about in his most recent interview that, one of his primary focuses is figuring out how to make the horses feel more real. How do you make the horse feel part of the family? Mm-hmm. And I guess in your instance, where you're running thousands of races, it's a little bit easier to grow attached. But it seems like they've already started that process.
It's smart, yeah, and it works both ways. Like, I run so many races that you kind of get desensitized to it a bit, but there's always the horses that just have the extra like value. Like LBJ was a big one because it kind of put us on the map. Sleight of Hand was another one where early on we had that. I think it was May, and we just grinded the crap out of that one early on. That kind of gave us the funds to fund some of these other horses. And then Princess of Power is probably the most recent, where really put us on the map as our first like top 10 horse, and made the first grand final, which was always a really cool day in Zed. So that's probably my most sentimental horse in terms of attachment that I have right now.
With all the changes that you've seen to kind of like Zed Run over the last few months, primarily, since like August, October, I know for myself, I completely underestimated the value of having a horse that can win races to make money. I thought I was just going to be a breeding stable only. I was going to breed, but breeding's so random, it's really hard to consistently make money doing that. Do you think if somebody's coming in that they should really focus on a racer first after they kind of tiptoed around and learn the game? If they have like an ether soda to go, try to find a consistent racer and use that as a building block? Or since you start breeding more, do you think snagging Genesis and try to breed your way up is a better plan?
I mean, I think the buy right now is probably it's tough. If you're new to the game, you need something that's going to hook you, right? And I don't think buying a Genesis that at this point doesn't have any utility and waiting once a month to breed is going to hook you in. Like the day-to-day racing is what is so fun and so addicting, I think, for a lot of us. So in terms of entertainment and getting hooked on the game, I think racing is where it's at. You can find a ton of good racers in this market for like under 0.1 or somewhere in that range at least. And there's nothing saying you have to go straight into $5 or $10 races. Like you're not going to get rich quick necessarily in that level of horse, but there's plenty of hidden gems who can go pound the $2 races, and those are just as fun to watch in terms of entertainment value, and get your 10 races a day doing that. But then in terms of the best buy right now, I would say just stocking up on those floor Genesis, which are right around that like 0.09, 0.1 at this point.
It's crazy.
Just feels a little cheap. As soon as they do anything with the like rewarding of a Genesis, those are going to skyrocket because it doesn't feel like they should be that cheap right now.
Well, I remember pre-stamina too. I think Buterin floor was like 0.5. Buterin mare floor was like 0.8.
Right.
So it wasn't that long ago. It feels like it was, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, and people love these coins. So as soon as they announce anything on DES or any kind of more definite timeline, those things are going to be going way up.
Yeah.
Not financial advice.
No, never. So the new tournaments were announced. This first one, there is no grand final. You don't have to race horses in your non-preferred distance funnel. How do you feel about that one?
That one's interesting. Yeah, I think there's a number of things to it. Like I like the qualifying kind of, they continue to appeal to different types of horses, which is nice. This is one I would say geared more towards the U horses, where I think it's 10 points you get if you win, and then a little bit for second, and then hardly any for third, and then nothing else. So it's really, really winning what matters, which is going to reward a ton of those U horses. So it'll be a very different looking field, especially in the mid category, I think, with a bunch of these super variance horses. But so I do like that. I like appealing to a tournament category, like a horse category that has not been appealed to yet. But the no grand final, I think it's fine. It's something different. I think they're testing things out. I think the prize pool is still going to be the same. So basically, they're just adding on the grand final pool to each of the three distance categories. Right. So I think this really helps the sprinters more than anybody, because in order for a sprinter to win, they pretty much had to win the 1,000 and win the 1,400 and place strong enough in the 16 to have a shot. Just because it is so geared with the distances in the grand final being a 2,000, a 22, and a 26, all kind of in the spectrum of the distance horses, in the mids, kind of like everywhere, that it's really hard for 4 of your 6 distances in a grand final to not be your good distances as a sprinter. So you're basically taking some stuff that didn't appeal to it, juicing up the pot for that specialty group. And I think I'm pumped about it for my sprinters. I have a few that are a little U-y, like Mirajo, Rey del Mundo are 2 of the ones we have that are quite U'd, and they don't always qualify for the tournament because they'll win at 25%. But if you're doing podium rate for the first one, that's not going to get it done. And even for Fibonacci, they didn't come in second and third enough to offset all the bottom, whatever, 50% runs. So sometimes qualified, sometimes didn't if they got hot, even though they had like 25% win rates. So if they have a 25% win rate in this tournament coming up, they're going to be in. And then if they just get lucky 3 times in a row, if they get that good roll, then they're going to win it all, because there's not a horse that can beat Rey Del Mundo's good run at 1,200. I don't care who it is. So if that horse wants to win and gets lucky, then I'll appreciate the bigger pot to that distance funnel.
I'll circle back to Rey Del Mundo because I definitely want to ask you about him. But what do you think about this maiden tournament? I think this is something that a lot of us was hoping for.
Yeah, we got a taste of that with the zombie one a while back. I think they did a number of good things with that. I think it's going to have some great impacts on the unraced market, right? Because everybody's going to be kind of running to get the unraced Genesis if they're out there that are pretty affordably priced.
There's a mare listed, I think, for 0.22.
Yeah,
9.
So just buy it, pocket it, and you're going to be killing a bunch of birds with that stone. Like, you just have there's your Genesis for the upcoming Des announcement, whenever it comes. You're going to have the maiden piece, but it's also going to help stimulate, I think, the like breeding economy too, because you're going to see all these people trying to get an unraced, and all these people who breed sell their unraced because there's going to be a market for it, because everybody wants that lotto ticket going into the maiden tournament. And you're going to see all these horses and kind of legends born from that, because I mean, it's relatively level playing field. Nobody knows what beast is going to be bred in the next month, or what one's going to be unleashed in that tournament. So it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of storylines, and hopefully, I mean, maybe some new blood coming out in the grand final.
And it's kind of crazy too, because if you think, I think Legendary Beater and Flora last time I looked was right around like 0.015, 0.018. Like, you could essentially buy 3 or 4 of those, and as long as you make it through the first round running freeze to qualify, you make your money back. And if you have more than one, it's just printing money for small stables that are able to do that.
It's gonna be awesome.
Now, what kind of strategy can you disclose without giving away what you guys are going deep in on?
For the maiden?
Yeah.
I think we're loading up on the low Z pieces, because that's, I mean, just naturally gonna have a little more ability to that. And one thing that's interesting with the maiden is typically those quarterfinals are sorted by class points, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with the maiden, yeah, it's going to sort it a little bit, but a Z1 only starts, I don't know, 20 points different than a Z8, right? So if you're going to be in a relatively close area, so if you can get one that really does well in qualifying and you can kind of tank back a little bit, it's not going to be these 1,000-point horses all racing against each other. It's going to be ones that are a little more evenly matched in terms of class points, and it's going to be a little more mixed up. So we're thinking load up on the low Zs where we can, load up on just kind of some breeding within our stable, and there's an element of luck too. Like, anybody who says there's not, didn't play in the same game. So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited, but that's kind of what we're thinking 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah. How much do you think having that Z10 and starting with lower class points with the new class system, so that we can stay in class 4 that much longer, running these unproven horses, and you're discovering them, in class 5 instead of in class 4? Mm-hmm. How much do you think that's going to impact, those first potentially 6 to 10 races?
Yeah,
for a horse, because if you have a Z5 and you win your Griffey, like, that's a completely different discovery process than a Z10.
Yeah, I would say, for that reason, it's going to make a big difference, right? You're going to, arguably not as big of a difference as it made a week ago before they changed the class system, because they're wider now, but it's still going to be huge. Another reason why, if you're kind of deciding what number Z to get one that's on the very low end of that spectrum. So, like, what I mean by that is Z1 through Z4 all start at the same class point going into the Griffin, right? So Z1s are the theoretically better buy there for bang for your buck for those class points. And then Z5 through Z9 all start at the same point as well. So go Z5 instead of Z4, that kind of thing, because it's going to give you a slight leg up. And then the ones you're going to be racing as a peer is going to be Z5 through Z9. And then same thing, Z10 plus. Your Z10 is going to be a prime spot. So Z10 Genesis unraced is going to be probably one of the best buys in terms of positioning yourself to potentially make a run in this tournament.
Have you heard of anybody want to unbox a Nakamoto for this tournament yet?
I've heard some rumblings. I mean, I would be stunned if there's not at least a handful of those scooped up and run for this. I'd be surprised. They're relatively cheap for what Z1s have been.
Yeah.
And I know a few of those, the high roller guys, and they're some degenerates like all of us. So I think it'll happen, and it'll be interesting to watch.
Even the Z2s, the price difference is so nice right now. I'm
Yeah.
sure someone's gonna unpackage a horse they weren't planning on taking out of the box.
I might be one of those guys. Not a Z1, but some kind of low Genesis. I feel like.
Okay, I'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, how do you feel about them just re-rolling the Fibonacci? Like,
I like it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that is like if you're looking for just kind of the overall like well-rounded tournament, that's probably the one where it rewards winning, but it's not totally reliant on winning. It still weights some of the podiuming. So I think there's a reason why they've done it 3 times. It seems to work and align with the payouts and things like that just kind of fit the current setup of the game. The other thing I think they're staying away from, or I wish they would just wait until they had it figured out, is like running these A-shaped tournaments and the pity point tournaments. They're great. I think they're awesome to appeal to everybody, but you need to keep it consistent throughout. Like keep it going into the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. And until you have the system capabilities to not have to switch it up as you go into like the money rounds, just stay away from the tournaments. It just makes people mad because you're going to have these terms of engagements who come in and race in hard races and get the pity points, but then they're actually a beast horse, and they come into the quarterfinals against other actually true pity point horses, and then you reward them for coming in first in those tournaments, just kind of against the spirit of the design of the tournament. So I love the idea, but fix the systems and revisit it when you can run them correctly.
No, I would agree with that. I think it was nice that they at least gave it a shot and showed that they're willing to be diverse. But it definitely, the outcome I don't think was as exciting as everybody hoped.
They need to tell and they also need to better articulate why it had to be this way. Like I've heard through the grapevine, because I've heard from a few people why it was, and there was a systems capability issue where they basically can't change the payout structure being first, second, third easily. It takes a complete system revamp, and they just don't have the resources right now because they're working on other things. But I don't think that was ever announced to anybody like publicly, and people are just thinking it was just an oversight of them poorly designing a tournament when it's not actually the case. So just like they could save themselves all this trouble by just communicating better.
Isn't it crazy that a simple announcement is really all it would take to satisfy 80% of the community?
It's so easy, and they're getting better. I'll give them that, but it's a low bar they have established.
Yeah, we found out about the Maiden Tournament a little bit in advance instead of the day before, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I feel like old Zed communication may not have thought about that, and they would have said like, "Yep, next week is the Maiden," or like, "Yeah, we're starting the Maiden tomorrow."
So I just brought all my horses 2 days ago.
Yeah, and that was smart. I mean, that's the stuff we should expect, not be surprised when they do, but a step in the right direction for sure. And now we can kind of plan our breeds around it over the next few weeks, line up some unraced purchases, things like that. So props to them for announcing that a few weeks in advance.
Now, if you have to quickly discover a horse, I know you prefer to kind of start at the ends, but does that mean you start at 1,000, or do you do 1,200 versus 1,000 because that gives you a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean,
more range, or does it matter?
If I had to handpick, I'd say 1,000, but 1,200 will tell you 99% of the same. Same thing with like 24 and 26. When you get to like 14 and 22 and 2,000, it gets a little more muddy. So I would stay within 1,000, 1,200, and then 26, 24.
Now, is that for your first 3 to 4 races every single time, unless you find flames?
Like no, I mean,
I'll go into the Maiden Tournament and you have, you got to figure out your horse really fast.
Yeah.
What distances are you hitting in the first 4 races if you haven't found it?
I think you want to that's my strategy. It's by no means the only strategy. Is find a griffin on one of the poles, and then if there's no flames, then try the other pole, and then kind of work your way. And that's where I was going back to saying, like, start easy, and if your horse can't flame at a distance in a very easy free race, then it's either not a distance or it's not really a horse worth running too much. So that's kind of the way I look at it, and I would just move on to the next one or try to part ways with it But if your horse, if you run a 2400 no flames, and then you go to 1000 no flames, and you do 1800 and no flames, then you should probably run a few more easy mids and just see if there's some kind of U developing. Because your only hope at that point would be you have a extreme variance horse that just doesn't have a very high podium rate, and you would
Mhm.
want to see either a ton of 12ths or a ton of first and seconds. And if you don't see that pretty quickly, it's probably not worth running.
I gotcha. Now, if you're running purebred veteran legendaries and Z30 exclusives, are you looking for hard fields in the Griff, or are you looking for the easiest ones you can possibly find to kind of get rolling into the discovery process? Because I've been seeing a ton with like Z122s, and it's like, what do I even do if I flame in that?
Right. I used to want hard fields back when we had odds, because you just learned so much more with that.
Right.
Now at this point, I'm almost accepting that I won't learn a ton from a Griffin unless it is like, I'll learn when it's not. Won't necessarily learn what it is. And I won't learn how good it is. But I know if I have a bad Griffin competition and it doesn't flame at one of the polls, then that's not it, because it's complete garbage. And it happens a lot. Like if you're a bad horse, I remember, I think Artois, I was talking to Ryan, and he got that horse unraced and ran it in a Griffin, and it was not a very hard Griffin at all. And it was, I think, a sprint. And it didn't flame as a Z2 in a very bad like Z Griffin. And at that point, we were like, yo, you might have something here, because that means it has extreme distance preference to not flaming in that field. Because a Z2 should have a ton of consistency, where if you're going up against a bunch of like donkeys, it should flame unless it has extreme preference. And
Right.
it no flamed, came in 12th. And I mean, lo and behold, it's one of the best distance horses in the game. So that's the type of thing where like we knew sure thing it wasn't a sprinter at that point. And so I would say, like, to answer your question, I don't really care about the field, but if it's a bad field, take note of that. And if it doesn't flame, it's not the distance. And don't say like, well, let me try it again just to be sure. If you're like the best Z in a Griffin and you're not flaming and it's not a mid, then it's probably not the distance.
That makes sense.
But once again, like you don't want to completely solve and completely rule out a horse by you testing it if you're trying to sell, because there's no mystery for a buyer, right? That's why things don't sell, because you've proven it doesn't run well. And that's why you want to sell. You need to leave a little meat on the bone, a little mystery. And maybe you miss every once in a while, but that's actually, I mean, not a bad thing. Like, you want people to buy stuff that has upside. That's part of the reason why it sells. So the nature of that beast is you're gonna sell things a little early sometimes, but you want to figure it out before the general public, so you can still have a buyer out there who might like some of the mystery.
Now with flames, how much weight are you putting into a horse that flames?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors, right? Like you need to account for the Z. Like C1 flames don't mean a ton when you're going up against a bunch of like Genesis Nakamotos who just have that consistency in them, and it's literally geared to flame. So that's why when I have like Princess of Power up in class 1, I don't care at all if she doesn't flame in a 2600, because I know that the variance in the win equity is still there, and so I don't worry too much about that. But if you're in like a very level race with all the same Z's, and it's a specialist race on one end or the other, they matter. They do it if it's a true apples to apples thing, where you want flames more than not, because that means you're going to be profitable and be in the podium. But people do get trapped, but it's normally a big Z discrepancy that causes it, which means there's more variance in one of the horses that's not flaming, even though they're good. Or you're in a mid area where flames in the mid mean literally nothing. Like, especially in like class 4 and class 3, you're going to have a new Z5 coming up, and they'll flame every time, and they may not be good at all. It just means they're consistent, and they're racing against a bunch of variance horses who win like 20% of the time and are irrelevant 80%. So the fact that they are consistent, that Z5 is consistent 60% of the time, it makes them look good, but that doesn't mean they have win equity, which is what you want. So mids doesn't mean much, but on the polls, it means more, and eventually you can get a feel and get a better read on it if you adjust for things like Z number.
Okay. Yeah, because I was kind of wondering, because I know it seems like flames matter, especially at distance preference, like you were talking about. But I know there's a lot of people who get trapped into buying horses that are either at their peak or just not as attractive as they thought they were after they purchase them, because they're either looking for a high flame rate and it has it, but it just isn't actually winning,
Mm-hmm.
or it has a lower flame rate, but it can win because it's higher variance. So I didn't know if there's a way to kind of spot or avoid either
Yeah,
kind of archetype, especially when you're looking at like class 5, 4, and 3 horses.
yeah. I mean, you need to study closely as to like how they how the previous owner ran it, like what were the distances, what was their game plan, were they doing high dollar, low dollar, were they doing free, and don't be surprised if you get the horse and you try to deviate from that plan if you see different results.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Ray Mundo. So you originally bought Ray for 8 ETH, correct?
Yeah, so I split actually. That was one of the Diamond Hands arbitrage dual
Now,
purchases.
didn't you buy it originally way back in the day too?
Oh no, that was Bexel. So Bexel bought
Okay.
it. I tried, but I was asleep, and I don't think at that point I would have paid 8.
Hmm.
But yeah, he bought it like 2 a.m. and then I woke up to a nightmare.
Now, what made you horse? Because I know I've heard a couple people say that it's just a horse they never would have sold to begin with, and the fact that you're able to get it so cheap was a steal.
Yeah. Still talking about Ray. Sorry, you cut out.
Yeah, yeah. Still talking
Yeah.
about Ray.
I mean, I was pumped about it. I know Ray quite a bit. I mean, from I think Bexel kind of ran it more as a tanking horse where he kept it in C3 and C2, and I did something similar with Mirajo. And Mirajo was close, but Ray's definitely better, like kind of the next level up, um, just a little more variance. So I dealt with it a ton there, and that was back when odds were around, so you could more definitively say this horse is better than the other. And then he sold it off to Inferno on Catch Me Riding Derby, and he kind of rode it all the way up into pretty deep into Class 1 because it was during the new class point system where you get 6 per win. And that horse wins so much that it's just impossible to keep down unless you devote a lot to tanking. So he just rode it up. And I think he just wanted to get some more liquidity when we were buying it to invest back in Genesis horses because they're so undervalued. So he saw something he was selling at kind of fair market or maybe slightly less, but in a pretty illiquid market. And
Right.
he knew he could take that 8 and reinvest it in some stuff that would be even better buys, which myself and Diamond Hands at that point were just trying to get some racers in that stable and get some tourney qualifiers and difference makers. So we had an eye on that one for a long time. It just kind of matched where you had a motivated seller and we were motivated buyers, and we got a price we feel pretty good about.
Now I've heard you say on every single show you've been on that liquidity's king. I
Yep.
don't think a lot of people who don't have any type of finance or investment background quite understand what you're talking about when when you bring that up, which is probably 85% of the class 4 and 5 racers. So like, what do you mean by that, and why is it important?
I mean, I think with liquidity, I mean, you want to have the ability to have money on the sidelines to devote when you see that A+ buying opportunity, right? So there's nothing worse than when you see an opportunity. I have this story where I was going to buy Valley from the owner early on, like 10 races in, for I think at the time it was like 8 Ethereum, which was still a lot, but it ended up selling to WAGMI for like 20 plus. And it was early and I really wanted it, but we had just made some other purchases that had upside but didn't work out. And I think we only had like 5 liquid at the time. So we just had to kind of sit on the sidelines, watch Crimson buy that horse, and end up selling it for even more. So that was the way we learned that lesson. But it's really interesting to have the patience to skip those kind of B+ opportunities, and you'll be rewarded for that. And when you see an A+ one, you'll know it, or at least you'll grow to know it. And at least the way you're trying to build up the bankroll, it's very important in trying to keep yourself alive in the game.
Now, is there a any type of ratio of how much of your total asset value you want to have liquid, or is it just kind of based on personal strategy, or do you have a rule of thumb or
For
something you're
me,
trying
it's
to build
more,
towards?
yeah, for me, it's more like the amount of Ethereum I have liquid,
Okay.
less than like the percent, just because as the stable's grown, I think the price of horses hasn't necessarily grown at that same rate. So it's more so like what can I buy with my liquid Ethereum, and I
Mm.
think that's a different goal for everybody. For me, I would want to be able to, if a horse pops up and I think it's a complete game changer, people are sharp enough now, and you don't know enough early on, so you kind of have to wait longer to mitigate some of the risk, to where it's pretty normal to have to pay 4 or 5 if you really want that true like tournament winning upside. So I would always want to have at least that much liquid, and except unless it's like an extreme circumstance. Obviously, if you have that much liquid and then an A plus opportunity comes out, you're going to buy it, and then you're not going to have that much liquidity. So I think I always shoot for like 5-ish at least. But it's getting harder and harder. And I think as the market has come down a bit, there's more things that look like they're really good buys. But until you're at the bottom, they're not actually as good as they look. It's just perception, because on the way down, it looks like you're getting deals. So we have been riding things down a little bit, but I've been trusting the assets and the racing ability, which has been nice. Like, honestly, our racing income has not dropped that much with the introduction of tournaments, right? It's more infrequent in terms of like you're racing all this time, but your big payday is going to come on that Wednesday with the tournaments, and you hope you get kind of lucky and make a good run. But there's still a ton of money to be made out there. Um, so it's kind of interesting that prices keep dropping and dropping, but there's still plenty of money making opportunities.
How many hours a week are you spending playing Zed Run?
Too many. Yeah, because not a lot of people know. I still have a day job as well, which is 45 hours a week. But I think I probably spend 60 hours on this. I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
much all consuming. But I mean, a lot of it is very passive. Where by this point, I've entered like 20,000 races, so I can enter them in my sleep pretty much. And it sounds like a ton with that many horses, but you just do it so often that you almost become like a machine, where it's just like, all right, I see this distance, see this buy-in. And most of our horses, thankfully, are high enough up on the food chain that we don't worry too much about who else is in the field. So we can enter them early and just kind of let it ride as it needs to go. But it's entering 100 plus races a day. And then a lot of the work around like entering those races and tracking the performance does a lot of the other work for you, right? You'll see if a new horse pops on the scene, because if you're in that many races, you're going to be very plugged in with the racing pulse. So that helps you research and know which ones you should add to the watch list and things like that. And then we have Robbie on the team, who is a big data guy, and he is big in the Power BI, and he builds us some of the tracking pieces where I'll flag a horse and we can import some stats from Haku or StatNax and really just see a profile on that horse all on one page. So that helps a lot from the organization standpoint. And then arguably we could just need another guy who like reaches out and actually buys the horses for us, but we don't have that much bandwidth now. So we're doing that through ourselves and through burners.
I gotcha. Yeah. How quickly in the game did you have to start creating burner stables to make offers?
I tell you, a lot of like, I keep saying this, but a lot of what I've learned in Zed is learning it the hard way. But they're not necessarily mistakes; they're just like lessons, you know. So for this one, it was Diamonds was the horse. Talking to Evergreen, and I flagged that horse so early. It was like 5 races in. It was odd, so it wasn't like nearly as impressive as it'd be now. But I was 100% sure it was going to be everything Diamonds is right now. And I made like a 3 ETH offer 5 races in, which I think at that point the Z2 was like a floor was like 1. So not an insane offer, but someone could say I bought this horse 3 days ago. I'm gonna get a quick $6,000 on it, and I'm happy. But unfortunately for us, it went into Diamond Hands Evergreen, and he was like, he kind of raised some eyebrows there. We didn't hear anything back on OpenSea. Couldn't find him on Twitter or Discord, because he had literally just started the game. Right. And he kept running it, and we kept seeing it dominate. And we would up the offer a little bit, like every 12 hours, went up to 5. went up to like 7 on OpenSea. And at this point, I think he started to learn like, this is a lot of fun. I'm winning a bunch of money. And he created that Twitter
Yeah.
account. I think the Jarek Twitter he still uses. And I can't remember if he reached out to me or I reached out to him, and we started chatting. And he was basically like, yeah, I knew as soon as you started like coming in that hot, and I looked at your stable within OpenSea and saw, like, I didn't know who Arbitrage Racing was, but I know who LBJ Goat was at the time. And I said, oh crap, these guys are really good, and they're coming in hot at my horses or my horse. I should probably hang on to this. So at that point, there was not a number I could have said that he was going to sell it for. I think I went up to like 10 at that point, which at that time was like all we had. But I was completely convinced it was going to be a game changer. And he just kind of like said, thanks for the offer. Like, normally, yes, but here's why I'm thinking this. And I mean, it was good logic. Like, he thought we knew something he didn't. I guess he was kind of right. So ever since then, we have a few burners, I'll say, because I am pretty confident if like someone random had come and offered him 5 Ethereum just out of the gates, he would have strongly considered it. But he's a sharp dude and did a lot of research on his own.
Yeah. Now, how many people have reached out to you after they've seen their horse transferred from the burner to the arbitrage stable? And it's like, hey, man, what the heck?
No, I mean, people.
I'm sure they appreciate it because they're
pretty good at it.
Yeah, making pretty good money. You're not really lowballing much.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, we are giving competitive offers, at least for the amount of risk that's there, and it's not like we are, like, being sleazy about it. Like, they're the ones we offer. And a lot of times it's a buy now as well, also. But like, we'll make an offer, and they're the ones accepting it. So it was a price that they agreed with, and we're happy to part with the horse at. So with that, sometimes we'll get somebody reaching out on like Twitter, like, oh man, I sold this horse and I just saw it's transferred to arbitrage, and they were like, rip. But then some are like, I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. And then some people just don't care who they are selling to. They just like the money. So I know one of our latest purchases was from Maximus at the On Tour owner, and that horse is a Z1. It's an amazing breeder, and we had bought in the past our Latin horse. It's like Alice Propice Volat. Who's a good C2, C3 distance horse from that same mom, and we got a new one, or that same mom had Evergreen Gates about a month ago, and I reached out, and the first time we bought from him, he was like, I'm not gonna sell to arbitrage because that's gonna, I didn't say ruin the game, but like, it's gonna just make the stronger. And he eventually sold to us. And this time we like started a friendship based off that. And I think I saw Evergreen like 3 races in, reached out, and he was like, yeah, it's a beast, man. I'm so happy I got a new one. And then we basically stayed in contact for the next 2 weeks, and it just opened up the network to us buying Evergreen, I think for 8 ETH a few weeks back. So kind of took the situation of someone who once said they weren't going to ever sell to us, and now they've sold 2 of their best horses to us. So it's a good pipeline.
With the changes like Stama and stuff, I know before you, probably about 2 months ago, you said you're looking to make a quarter of your purchase back in the first month. Is that still the metric you're going off of with the changes to racing, or
no,
are you kind of evaluating it now?
Yeah, it's a lot tougher. I think I said that. I think I was on Zed Insights. That was probably August. It was right before they turned off odds and introduced stamina. So at that point, you could just get a horse and run it literally as much as like the queue times would let you do it. So at that point, there was also a lot more unknowns about the lifespan of a horse, like how much breeding was going to impact, how fast horses were going to get lapped in terms of their ability. We have a little more data on that now. And I think most horses, their longevity is better than I was expecting at that point. So it's probably not as aggressive there. I think even at the time, 25% was probably a nice to have, not necessarily like a requirement, because if you're making 25% of it back in a month and you sell it, you're probably gonna get close to that value at least. And you're going to make, like, in what industry can you make 25% a month? Like, it's insane. So that was aggressive. But now, like, I don't know, it's hard because the payouts are they're higher significance with tournaments, but they're less frequent. So you almost have to look at it like a longer span to get rid of some of the variance. Like Princess of Power made like 2 Ethereum in that first tournament. And it's just like, and then the last 3, she's made like 0.3. So it's just a very infrequent inconsistent payout structure, but still at the same time, I would say, I don't know, every maybe 10% a month. Like you want to get some back, and you want to make sure first off it's a profitable horse, and then second off you also have a longer lifespan, because I don't think bred horses are passing the elite horses as quickly as I guess had feared at the time, which I don't know, it might be, I don't know if that's a problem or not, but I like it as someone who has a bunch of current good racers.
Now, is there anybody you have to dodge with Princess of Power, or do you just race anything that comes
No,
into your distance?
yeah,
I didn't think
I
so,
think
but
I was looking at her stats. Like one thing, people always thought I dodged C1 with her because I
yeah,
tanked for so long. But I mean, it was truly like there's just so much more volume down in C3. And at that point, when I was doing it primarily, you could race up in class. So
yeah,
why am I going to hamstring myself in class 1 against the best of the best when I can keep her down in class 3 and get those solid prize pools and then still race in class 1 when I want to? It just made
yeah.
no sense. It wasn't that I was, or she was scared of class 1. It was more so it's just optimally running her in those lower classes to get the more volume and easier competition down there. And we were still only running like the $25 plus races. But I was looking at the win rate back then, and it was like 30, 35% at distance when I wanted her to win. And then in class 1 now, which is still like, it's insane right now actually, because they just reclassed. So everybody in class 1 is 140 or above. And those are really the only horses that are running right now are the beasts who can make money. And she's still winning at like 27% over the last week in like a 40 race sample. So the performance hasn't dropped that much. There will be a day, I'm sure, but I just look at the distance and the dollar amount, and I'll enter.
Are you buying for breeding potential now, or are you still just racing first and kind of farm the best breeders in the game for their breeding?
Yeah, I'm more aware in my purchases. It's still racing first, but there's
Mm-hmm.
certain purchases I've had where, like I just bought a Z1 Autumn Gold that was listed for like, I think it was super cheap. It was like 6.9 when the floor was like 8 or 8.8. So it was cheap. And then I was still on the fence because I wanted to keep more liquidity for the racers. But then I looked on the blood tool and it was like a top 20 breeding Z1. So that was definitely something that made it a no brainer. So it's more just like another data point if I'm on the fence. I haven't necessarily I haven't seeked out any breeders in specific, but um, what's up, dude? No specific breeders. Aside, there was one I tried to get and they turned it down. Um, it was Desert Rose's mom
Mm-hmm.
and also Bright and Early's mom. It's the same one. And I tried to buy that Z5 and I couldn't get a deal on it. But other than that, that's the only time I've ever like seeked out an exclusively breeder. They always need to have racing for me.
Okay. Is that because you know the racing game so well and you want to stay kind of in your lane, or is it just because you don't think the premium for the good breeders is kind of the
It's more so
style of gameplay?
I haven't found the deal to help offset it. Um, like I talk about these A plus buys, right? And I can identify a steal in the racing environment a lot easier than a steal in the breeding. And people who breed are kind of in it for the long game, so they
Mm-hmm.
typically aren't fire selling these easy to breed horses for a price that I would feel good about buying. So I just think there's better buying opportunities right now with the racers. And it's like easier to identify a good racer early and get that discount with some of the risk than it is to identify a good breeder early. Because if you identify a good breeder early, they could very easily just add one lucky offspring, right? So
Yeah,
it's just hard.
it's sort of hard to hard to kind of pick and choose.
It's tough.
Um, I know there's something else I was going to ask you. Oh, Blood Tool. So there's been a lot of criticism about Blood Tool, but I do know there's also a lot of people who really think it's worth the purchase. How did you kind of think about purchasing it, and how do you think other people should think about whether or not it's something that's worth their investment?
I mean, I talked to Dan Chan all the time, and he was always pumping it when I didn't have it. But I mean, I've not regretted it one bit since I paid the ETH for it. I mean, I think what you should think about as a stable as it would be good for you is I don't think there's any denying it has some good predictability in terms of which horses tend to breed well. At the very least, it does a great job analyzing historically bred horses and telling like who are the offspring of each horses and how good are they at running. He does that in a very clean manner. But in order for it to be worth the 1 ETH you pay, you need to make sure you are in this game for the long haul so you can use it every single month of those breeds. And then B, you need to have enough horses, enough low Z horses for it to be worth your while. I would never suggest someone with just starting the game with like 5 high Z horses to use it, just because it would take so long to get its value. But if you have even a few lower Z horses or Genesis, you can grow the stable pretty efficiently with that tool, and it's pretty easy to use. And also, like, if you're into buying breeders, it's a very easy way to have his leaderboard and see who's the best, and then which are for sale, what are those prices. And I was able to decide on that Z1 within like 30 seconds because I just plugged into ID in the blood tool, saw it where it was ranked. I put stock in that ranking, could click and see all the offspring super easily, and pulled the trigger before anybody else could.
No, it sounds pretty good. What's the one horse that you wish you could run? That you haven't yet.
Man, it would have been Vanilla Bean if you'd asked this a week ago. I'll say Y2K 2K. That horse is just, I don't know if you know too much about it. It's an OG.
Has it been on the track a lot lately?
Exactly, which that's fine by me. But
yeah,
it's just so good. I think it is like the 1400 king, with Ducky being the queen, and just no horse can really touch it there. Even like 1200, 1000. It's just so good, and it's a Z2 with some nice variants, which you don't see too often. So it's just got such a great wind share, and I think the distance has made the heart grow fonder because I haven't seen it much. So I was like, man, I remember how fun this horse used to like look running. So that would be the one.
Cool. How much would you offer to get it?
How much would I offer? Oh man, not as much as I have right now. I would say I don't have the funds. I feel like it's a 15 to 20 ETH horse.
Yeah. Is there a price you'd let Princess of Power go for?
There's a number. I don't think it's a price like I could say, but if it came to that, I don't know if I would actually let it go. It would have to be above Artois money.
Yeah.
So I'd say 30 plus would make me think. I still don't know. So if you're listening, WAGMI, I think you'd be the only one who would even think about that. So we can chat if you wish.
Yeah, real quick, do you think you're still the best racing stable in the game?
No. From a tournament perspective, no. I think they WAGMI passed for sure. In terms of like, if you had to pick one stable who was going to win a tournament or a grand final, that it'd be them. I like to think we're uniquely positioned enough where when it comes to like farming Ethereum, we're still number one because we have the whole gamut of horses pretty strategically laid out. Most of the classes, really any distance, any dollar amount we can enter. So I think we're pretty optimally positioned from a paid racing standpoint. But from a tournament racing standpoint, they're super heavy on class 1 and get rewarded for that. It's only a matter of time before they win a grand final.
Yeah, I was curious how you felt, and yeah, their purchasers are definitely at the very top end of the hierarchy.
There's a few. I mean, they're a beast. Crazy Horse is always good. GVG is way up there. Those are some that I think don't get talked about enough. And GVG will throw some money around, but he also breeds some beasts in house too. So he's got a great one. Roy Rager's got some really good ones. They bought Twisted Urgency the other week for I think 12. It's a Z2, and that was a horse we really wanted 3-4 months ago. It had just been run really sparingly, but a super U horse in that sprint to mid range. I think we had offered like 9, kind of back in the Diamonds age, back in August or so, and he got it for 12 on a buy now, like last week, and it did really well. So that's a beast, and he just has a bunch of those really sharp purchases that oftentimes I wish I had made, or he just outbid me on.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. And yeah, I'm sure everyone's gonna look this over several times before the tournaments get rolling.
Yeah, hopefully I divulged enough to be interesting, but not so much that I just get made a fool on the track.
Well, I think your experience in as many races as you run will amplify your ability to use your information beyond the competition quite a bit there.
That's the goal. Well, awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks.